Is this the week the government lost control? Not just has the government lost control of asylum hotels, losing a case in the High Court. Not just has the government seemingly lost control of many of the streets, with shoplifting, for instance, at record highs in modern Britain. But has the government also lost control of the economy? Inflation now almost twice what it was at the time of the general election. Yes, today's new inflation figures are stark reading for the Chancellor, but what do they mean for the country at large? My name's Tom Harwood, and this is GB News Originals. Remember to click that subscribe button to stay completely up to date. Now, we can all remember back at the time of the general election last year. Inflation had returned to 2%. That is the Bank of England's legally mandated target. It, of course, had been on a rocky ride over the previous 2 years, peaking in double digits, but through various policies and through higher interest rates, most perniciously, inflation was brought back down. Inflation got to that 2% target that economists, that the Bank of England, that the government really wants to see. However, in the months since the general election, things have taken a very, very different turn. Let's just look at the last 3 months we have data for. In May, the inflation number was 3.4%. In June, 3.6%. July, 3.8%. This is a clear and damaging trend, and we've seen this month after month. The Bank of England expects that next month, inflation is going to hit 4%. That is twice the Bank of England's target. This means that prices are going up faster than they have been in a very long time in shops and through wherever people buy things up and down the country. But what has been hit the hardest? Well, in the year to July, the price of beef has gone up by almost 25%. The price of coffee has gone up by 18%. The price of chocolate has gone up by 17.2%. And the price of fruit juice, 8.6% up. These are crucial indicators that people will see on the shop shelves. This is both an economic issue, because people will be spending more to get the same amount of goods, or even spending more to get a little bit less of the same amount that they're used to. That has an economic impact in terms of the vibrancy of the economy, the amount that people can spend all over the place. A limited amount of spending means a limited amount of money sloshing around the economy. Businesses doing a lot worse than they otherwise would be. Discretionary spending being reined back on by people up and down the country. And that leads on to knock-on effects, less business being done and less tax receipts for the Chancellor. So that's the economic problem right there in the run-up to what we're expecting to be a very difficult budget come the autumn. But there's also a political issue here. A deep political issue. Yes, people will be poorer, and yes, the economy will be worse off than it otherwise would be. But people will see these particular goods more than other indicators of inflation. These are really impactful political items that people will be able to see on their shelves. Whilst this rise in inflation today surprised many economists, it was higher than many economists were expecting. I think that many people up and down the country will not be surprised.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
People who do a weekly shop week in, week out will have seen those prices going up. They will have been able to feel the inflation before the official data confirmed it. People up and down the country will be able to have been saying to the politicians, actually, inflation has been travelling in the wrong direction. You don't need to read an Office for National Statistics report to work that one out. But there's more to this too, more than those staple foods that have gone up by up to 25% in the year to July. There's also petrol. Petrol has gone up by 3p per litre. Now this is a really difficult thing because it's not just about the price at the pump that people are paying. It's also about the fuel that feeds into the rest of the economy. If fuel is more expensive, well then just about every other part of the economy that requires transportation or indeed machinery use, well that becomes more expensive too. And that feeds through in a longer term inflation expectation. That means that the Bank of England can confidently predict that this isn't going to be the end of the rise in inflation. We're not going to see a capping out at 3.8%. The Bank of England is already expecting next month inflation to go up to 4%. Now, where it might go after that, who's to say? But some economists are predicting it is going to go further higher still. And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the pound in our pocket? Well, the same number of pounds that we spend will buy less. Our wages will be worth less. And prices, of course, will be higher. This is a very difficult political issue for the government because it means that the gains that they have been crowing about since the last general election, because there have been pay increases in the economy, well, this almost wipes out those pay increases altogether. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation expects that almost all pay increases have now been overtaken or largely by inflation, perhaps wages just 0.2% higher than they were before, despite higher pay rises. Now, you can see what sort of demoralisation that will perform for people up and down the country. There have been political charges as to why this has happened. The Conservatives, of course, have been speaking about that ill-fated budget from the Chancellor. The Chancellor's budget that raised taxes, particularly taxes on employment. How have businesses been able to pay for those extra taxes, the greater expense to hire people? Well, of course, they've hired at a lower rate. We've seen a drop-off, a massive drop-off in job vacancies across the economy. But for those who couldn't just not hire new people or who couldn't let people go, we're seeing higher prices to pay for those higher taxes. That clearly has an inflationary effect. But there's more to this too. Of course, we've seen very high pay rises for the public sector. We've seen very, very high pay rises awarded to, for example, train drivers. And we know that train and rail fares have shot up too in these latest transport numbers. Transport inflation is one of those big elements, those big buckets of inflation. Alongside petrol, alongside groceries, we're seeing transport being one of those big, pernicious, biting issues as well. Now, what the Chancellor will say to this is that the global economy has been through several convulsions over recent months. Donald Trump's tariffs haven't helped things, but also there has been a particular difference this year in this set of statistics measuring airfares. Airfares have jumped up hugely, although this might be a bit of an accounting trick. The Chancellor does have a fair thing to say here, because we're comparing not like for like. When we're comparing airfares this summer, they're in the middle of the school holidays, when we know that airfares are much, much more expensive. And we're comparing them to a previous point last year that was not in the school holidays, when airfares were cheaper. So that might be one element of the inflation figure that is artificially higher, not really higher this time round. But that doesn't take into account all the rest of the pushing up of prices, of food, of fuel, the things that people feel. So yes, whilst the Chancellor has a point when it comes to airfares, she does have a small point when it comes to the wider global headwinds, of course. But she can't run away from the record of those taxes that have gone up, of that uncertainty that has been injected into the wider economy. That has also clearly had an effect. Higher taxes can often lead to higher inflation, especially when businesses have to pay them and put up prices to do that. So there is a lot going on in the British economy. There is no one single cause of all of the trials and tribulations, but there are policies that can make things better and policies that can compound those problems. Now, many economists have pointed to the bad decisions, frankly, in the previous budget, the painful budget that it was at the end, in the autumn of last year, contributing to some of these headwinds that this country is now facing to a greater extent than many other developed countries around the world. But of course, there is more to this too. Farmers have particularly been hit hard of late. Financial planning for the new inheritance taxes, the family farm taxes being placed on farms, a poorer than average harvest this year. That, of course, is going to feed through into later months as well. It's not just the food that is grown to appear in our supermarket shelves right now. It's also the grain that is grown that will feed the cattle, that will feed the pigs, that will feed the chickens for later on as well. This has many knock-on effects later on for later months too. Now, these are big, big challenges to grapple for the Chancellor, and it does raise questions for the Bank of England. They have, of course, cut interest rates a few times now under this government, but will those interest rates now stop coming down because of these disappointing inflation numbers? The Bank of England, of course, uses interest rates to control inflation. They used it to great effect under the previous government, although that is painful for people with mortgages. It's painful for people who need to borrow money. It's painful for the wider economy, for growth in the economy too, because businesses need to borrow money. And if it's harder to borrow money, it's harder to invest, it's harder to grow. It's this difficult balancing act, the low growth, high inflation economy that we're existing in today. Some economists describe that as stagflation. And it's very difficult to try and rip yourself out of a stagflation situation. You want lower interest rates to encourage growth, but lower interest rates also encourage inflation. So do you higher interest rates? Do you raise those interest rates to knock down inflation, but sacrifice economic growth in the process? It's Hobson's choice. And lots of people would suggest that the Chancellor has incredibly difficult decisions, as does the Governor of the Bank of England. How will this all play out over the coming months? Well, one thing's for certain. It's going to be a very rocky road. Well, we're going to be following every twist and turn of this country's economic story here on GB News, and we're going to try and stay ahead of the curve when it comes to these issues of inflation, of tax, and of growth. Do click that subscribe button to stay completely up to date, and download the GB News app as well to keep on top of all the stories of this turbulent time for the British economy.